microtransactions, a term that didn't exist a decade ago, but is now a buzzword that can incite passion and anger in the industry at the same level as long-standing arguments like piracy and DRM. These small purchases of digital currencies, random loot and booster packs have extended their reach from free-to-play phone titles to AAA proportions in the space of a console generation. Or, at least that's how it seems. In fact, microtransactions, or at least the philosophies in making games around them, have been with the gaming industry since the beginning. Cast your mind back to the 1970s. Arcades are the place to play the new craze that is video games. Pong and Space Invaders reign supreme. The payment model for playing such new games isn't dissimilar from your current standard mobile affair. You play in short bursts and pay over a period of time per attempt, rather than up front. All the successful arcade cabinets focus on including a few key qualities or attributes, therefore, which can incidentally be found in many of today's successful microtransaction-heavy games. The first of these is difficulty spikes and progress blocks. These games are hard. Only so much gameplay can fit in the cabinet, so you'd better make sure your handful of levels aren't beaten in 15 minutes, or no one's going to keep playing them. Second, satisfying audio-visual feedback. The sound of exploding a ship in Space Invaders, or later eating a pill in Pac-Man, is instantly gratifying. Arcade games are relying on repeat players, and if the product isn't satiating the eyes and ears almost instantly, players will spend their next dime elsewhere. Third, final and most effective, competition. You're more likely to want to get a better score if someone is ahead of you, or if you're playing against a friend. It's why multiplayer games like Pong are so successful, or early 80s score chasers like Galaga. Particularly amongst the teenage male demographic the cabinets are appealing to, the need to win and prove skill is high. These psychological tricks don't go unnoticed outside the arcade. Through realization of these and just plain parental paranoia, the Western world is quick to label arcade games as dangerous. Distrust of these digital threats grows to the extent that in 1981 George Folks, a British Labour MP, attempts to pass the Control of Space Invaders and Other Electronic Games Bill. It fails, but it could have very easily not. 2 years after Folks tried to pass his bill, the beginning of the end arrived for this way of gaming anyway. The release of the NES in 1983 meant players had the arcade in their home on a much greater and more trustworthy scale, so there was no need to barter for loose change. Instead, there was an upfront cost, and nothing else. Of course, that's not to say the traits of the arcade disappeared overnight. For one, the badly lit, faintly sticky rooms survived long into the 80s and 90s. Also, game lengthening through difficulty, grinding, or obscure objectives was common practice on the NES, SNES, Genesis, and even into the N64 era to make shorter games feel worth the price tag. We can't forget the likes of the snail-paced Castlevania 2, the ridiculously hard Zelda 2, or the completely opaque NES Metroid now, can we? No. Rather, the ways of old slowly shrunk back into the confines of Japan as game budgets and length swelled. Games of the late 90s and early 2000s were the ones to fully do away with them, the likes of GTA 3 leaving reliance on artificial game extension in the dust. Subscription MMOs were arguably the only type of game continuing the trend started in the 70s, with an emphasis on competitive and social aspects. There were high-profile stories of addictions to such games, with cited symptoms similar to the ones arcade skeptics were afraid of, like the just one more run way of thinking, or social reliance on a game. But what about microtransactions now? We've yet to address what brought about their presence today, in their current form. Well, subscription MMOs are more of an anomaly, it seems. Really, the second coming of the arcade mentality can be pinned on 3 or 4 games. The fourth is League of Legends, the free MOBA that has undoubtedly influenced the industry, but it seems to exist separate from most of the AAA and mobile space though, so it's not the focus here. First we'll be discussing then is the ridiculously successful Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 10 years, you'll know this 2007 hit ushered in an entire generation of grey-brown pretenders. But what it also did was introduce the leveling loot system to a wider audience. Opening up more loot as you played, the leveling loot system led to an addictive cycle of getting owned, getting stronger, and then owning others. This, along with competition and audio-visual feedback reminiscent of the arcade era, allowed playtimes for the game to skyrocket into the thousands of hours, and become part of many players' daily routines thanks also to quick moment-to-moment gameplay. Modern Warfare didn't have microtransactions, but it set up the system that could be built upon to make them insidious, game-altering, and tempting. The playtimes of Modern Warfare were huge, of course, meaning that at any time across those hundreds of hours, money could have been put in the middle of the loot cycle, and players could have been manipulated into reaching for their wallets. Another Kickstarter of modern arcade mentality is a very different type of game, Farmville, played via Facebook. At its peak, the farming sim reached 3 million concurrent players. As you'd expect, the Facebook affiliation meant social features played a heavy role in its appeal. Seeing a friend improve their farm would encourage you to strive to get better yourself. It would have been a harmless incentive if it wasn't for the persistent timed progress blocks that prevented you from catching up. Progress blocks you could throw money at to skip, or call your friends in to help. The runaway success of Farmville, which had in-app purchases and used the arcade tricks of Yonder, meant imitators would follow as they followed Call of Duty. Most of the successful ones found themselves on the same platform as the final kickstarting game, mobile. That final game is Candy Crush Saga, released in 2012 on the App Store and Google Play. It used, and continues to use today with its still active player base, now textbook progression blocks in the form of lives which deplete when games are lost. The player then has to wait or spend currency that can be bought with real money, like in Farmville, to play again. It's a masterclass in social features and audio-visual feedback too, with deep Facebook integration and satisfying pops and sound effects when lining up rows of colourful candy. Farmville was chronologically before Candy Crush, releasing in 2009 and arriving on the App Store the following year, but it didn't have the staying power on mobile that its treat-switching peer did. Candy Crush, making $230 million in its first year, was the game that opened the mobile floodgates to swathes of developers and IP holders. They wanted a slice of the microtransaction pie the game had hit with its social integration, progress gating, and graphical appeal, and they got it. Pokemon Go, Homescapes, Mobile Strike, Clash of Clans, Juice Jam, Hearthstone, and quite literally thousands of poor tie-ins or lazy knockoffs made big bucks using the free-to-play model not set out by, but hugely popularised by, Candy Crush Saga. We've established that Farmville and Candy Crush used the same techniques the arcades did 4 decades ago, and use a similar payment model. However, it's important to understand that the models aren't the same. For one, when a microtransaction is purchased in, say, Mobile Strike, you know, the one with the terrible Arnold Schwarzenegger ads.
Sir! They're coming.
Apple or Google take a 30% cut of the money. Also, a player can feasibly play the game without ever reaching for their wallet. Perhaps more importantly and more favourable for the developer, however, no cash is needed to pay, the audience of possible buyers is considerably larger, and the game can be played anywhere. That last point is key. In our busy society, only those invested in games as a hobby would find the time to go to the arcade. Mobile games appeal to commuters, night shift workers, cleaners, CEOs, and everyone in between. Their free price tag means people of all backgrounds will try them. Said people will stay because they have time to kill sitting in a waiting room, or on the train. But at the end of the day, the microtransaction pitch now isn't any more deceptive than it was in the 70s, besides a wider audience and quicker payment capabilities, surely. It might seem that way, but Candy Crush and its imitators are in fact preying on a certain personality type to keep cash rolling in, those with addictive tendencies. 0.15% of mobile players account for 50% of mobile games revenue. Think about that figure for a minute. Yes, this minority is what the industry rudely calls whales. People who are psychologically prone to the easiness of payment, omnipresence, and 70s tricks of the mobile game, and usually end up spending thousands on a game over a period of years. It's a worrying prospect, blowing so much money on virtual trash, but it gets worse when we look at the last few years in the more traditional gaming space, and how microtransaction mentality has mutated from a way to empty pockets of change to a way to relentlessly exploit customers. This is where Call of Duty comes in, creating an easily exploitable model appealing to a wide and, let's face it, young audience. It presented a way for the new phenomenon of microtransactions to seep into games with an upfront price tag. It didn't happen straight away, as with mobile. Most early microtransactions in upfront cost games were fairly harmless. Take 2015's Destiny the Taken King, where emote packs were the only incentive to shell out cash for premium currency. These had absolutely zero effect on gameplay and were rarely seen outside of social spaces or private groups. However, the following year's Overwatch made any item in the game acquirable with real-world money, and to make matters worse, through completely random and worryingly addictive loot boxes. Blizzard's wild success with paid random loot, a natural evolution of what Call of Duty popularized and later added microtransactions to itself, caused other AAA upfront cost games to follow suit en masse. 2017 is the year of the microtransactions, or more specifically, the year of the loot box. Forza 7, Destiny 2, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Shadow of War. There's quite a list of $60 games with aggressive, luck-based microtransactions this year. While PC and console gaming may not have quite the same audience as mobile, so-called whales are definitely still exploited. On top of that, random paid loot in full-price games has been at the heart of many a controversy. The now infamous CSGO scandal, involving prominent YouTubers T Martin and Pro Syndicate, encouraged underage gambling, with pots spiraling into the thousands. Microtransactions have mutated yet again then from their mobile form. They're now prevalent in games with an upfront cost, and have more of an emphasis on gambling as opposed to mere audio visuals than ever. We don't know what's next for these exploitative business practices in mobile or traditional gaming. What we do know is we've come full circle from the dawn of the industry. We're seeing gaming revert back to its money-swindling origins. Shallow audio visuals, mobile progress blocks, and shoehorned social aspects are the name of the game for those chasing the money. However, the world is a different place to how it was in the 70s. Software is more accessible than ever, and game budgets have swelled to breaking point. We're seeing underage gambling and exploitation of addictive personalities mixed in with the old tricks. Games are wonderful things. In 40 years we've learnt they can tell stories, provide thrills, and transport us to new worlds. Yet now, the AAA space runs the risk of sinking further into the old ways of coin-eaters, now laced with the malice new technology facilitates. Maybe George Folks had a point. If this is the end result of arcades and AAA gaming as a whole, gaming does hurt people financially and mentally, and is supported by the exploitation of the vulnerable.